Chapter 25. Monday late morning. Back home, Doreen found and scanned in the information herself. I should have asked him to send me a digital copy, but whatever. She forwarded it to Mac as well. When he called a little later, he asked, "What are you doing now?" I visited the private detective the lawyer Ranford had hired to look into Jude Burns. Silence. What did he have to say? Pretty much the same as everybody, that he'd like to do anything he could to help nail this little guy. Max snorted at that. "Just love helpful citizens," he said. I got the impression his pie business wasn't all that great, and that some of the cases were pretty depressing, and that he was taking another look at his life and maybe not seeing anything he enjoyed the view of. Doreen heard a frown in Mac's voice when he asked, "So who is this guy?" "The owner of Corey Jr. Agency," she said. "He's Corey according to his cards." She pulled one from her pocket. "I've heard of him," Mac said, "but I've never met the guy." "Well, he knew a lot about me," she said, "maybe a little too much." "What do you mean by that?" "Just that he knew my name and about the cases I had worked on. Also the fact that I knew you, he called it an in with the police. Of course I told him it was more like an unholy alliance." At that Mac laughed. "That's the problem with solving all these cases," he said, "you've become famous." "Notorious," she said. "Please, famous is for the Hollywood jet set. That's not me." "That's where you came from," he said in all seriousness. "The glittery outside costume does not match the free spirit inside," she said. "I get that it has taken me a long time to figure that out, but I'm slowly working my way into it." "Fascinating," he said. "You really are a very interesting woman." "I'm just me," she said simply. "And the thing is, for the first time, I'm figuring out what just me is. A very generous, kind-hearted, hard-working woman in transition. Don't expect yourself to be anything yet. How about you just be you for now?" She laughed. "You know what? That's a pretty darn good way to be. I sent you a copy of the Pies file." "I see that," he said. "So, now I've got all these emails about a case we don't have a case for." "A copy of the death certificate is there too," she said. "Right. Ed Burns died of a heart attack." "Yes," she said, "but do you realize Jude's previous girlfriend also died of a heart attack?" Silence. She grinned triumphantly. "I get this was never a case for you guys, so you never investigated. Why would you? It wasn't something brought to your attention. But I am now bringing it to your attention." "Thank you," he said in a dry tone. "It's not like I don't have a million files sitting here already, which you've brought to my attention." "You're welcome," she said cheerily. "The thing is, 3 heart attacks makes me suspicious." "Maybe Jude likes to date the geriatric set," he said in a low voice. "Plus, as a gardener, I happen to know that digitalis in our gardens can bring on a heart attack, or can help soothe a heart in distress. Just saying. And you remember what I always say about assumptions. Remember that thing called proof and evidence?" she countered. "Because the thing is, if you don't look at the Pies file, we can't possibly know if there is any further evidence or not." He groaned. "Fine, but I doubt I'll find anything." And he hung up. She chuckled, and then she realized she hadn't asked him about the forensics on the ice pick. She picked up her phone again and texted him. "What about the ice pick?" His response was, "What about it?" "Human blood." "We said so." "Any matches?" "Not yet." She groaned. Why does science move so slow? But of course, there was no answer. Part of the problem was time, energy, effort, money, probably a myriad of other reasons. Like a bunch of other cases being on Mac's desk. She decided she needed food now. She'd run through enough of her energy, and here she was missing the most basic sustenance of life. It was Monday, almost afternoon now, and she didn't even remember what they were supposed to do for their next cooking lesson meal. Technically, they had missed their last cooking class, supposedly to be last night, due to Mac's crazy work schedule. She thought they had decided on the upcoming weekend for the next one, but what was it they were eating? She frowned as she made herself a sandwich. As she stared at it, she murmured, "It's a good thing I still love you." At that, Thaddeus hopped up and tried to steal a piece of lettuce from her sandwich. Goliath jumped up onto the chair next to hers and then on his back legs, his front paws on the tabletop. His nose was almost against her cheese. Doreen shuffled her plate over and said, "Oh no you don't. Guys, this is mine." She went to the cupboard, carrying her plate with her, and got out a few treats for each of them, which she placed in front of them. Instantly they gobbled them up, and just as fast, they were right back to staring at her sandwich. She shook her head and tried to mumble around a mouthful of food, but they ignored her, staring with their soulful eyes on her sandwich and then glancing up at her and then back at the sandwich. She rolled her eyes at them, and from her last bite, she carefully separated a piece of cheese, a piece of lettuce, and a little bit of ham, one for each of her critters, and then popped the very last bite of bread into her mouth. The pieces disappeared. She grinned. "You're welcome," she said. She got up and put away the food, but she was restless. There was just so much more she wanted to see and to do, and to solve. She figured another confrontation with that idiot of a son would be necessary, but she didn't want to get herself into trouble with the police. And if Jude started to feel threatened by her, he was just as likely to say she was causing trouble and get an injunction against her. Not that that would be fair, but she couldn't exactly see him going any other way, because being an obnoxious and overbearing bully was just who he was. She had looked up where Ed Burns's big house had been and found it easily enough, a huge famous old house on Abbott Street. Just that location alone meant the price tag on the taxes went up by triple what Doreen's were, but the property value itself was easily 10 times what her property would sell for. It was a perfect time to take the animals for a walk. The Burns estate was a good 10-minute drive away, but that was okay. She planned to drive there and then to walk the neighborhood. Monday afternoon found a few cars driving on the streets, and it was a beautiful avenue for walking. She loved the huge trees that overlooked the sidewalks on both sides, plus it led to a walkway under the main bridge into the downtown core. So with all 3 of her animals in her vehicle, she piled in, took her notepad, just in case she had observations to put down, and she had her app to record on her phone now too. It was a gorgeous day, not too hot, not too cold, sitting around the 27 Celsius degree mark, with the sun, blue sky, and enough clouds to take down the heat of the sun beating on her back by a couple notches. With Muggs on a leash, Goliath loose, and Thaddeus on her shoulder, she walked toward the address she had on her phone. It couldn't be too far away. She walked down the sidewalk, smiling at others walking with animals, most remarking at her odd trio. So many people were on bikes and rollerblades, and out enjoying life. The foot traffic was surprisingly heavy for a Monday. She thought for sure people would be at work. Maybe that was the difference here in this residential neighborhood. These people may have retired or may be working from home. The street traffic itself wasn't terribly busy, as it meandered more than going on a straight thoroughfare. The houses were fascinating. Some had massive gardens. She stopped in front of one in awe. A woman was bent down in the middle of a huge echinacea patch. She lifted her head and smiled, and Doreen exclaimed, "Wow, this is gorgeous." A flush of pleasure washed over the other woman's face, but Doreen meant it. She appreciated the selection, and just the vibrancy. "This is truly beautiful." The woman smiled and said, "Thank you so much. I have to tell you. It was chosen to be on one of the garden tours." "I am not surprised," Doreen said. "It's stupendous." After a few more minutes of talking, she wandered on, beaming a big smile at her critters. "You guys were so good back there, letting me talk without causing a fuss. Thank you guys." The next interesting place, about 3 houses down, had a mossy front lawn, but it was done in such a way that the lime green moss and the dark green moss were almost like a patchwork around a flagstone sidewalk. It was also fascinating, completely no maintenance, and that had stopped Doreen in her tracks. She stared at it for a long moment and shook her head. Wow, I never even considered something like this. A couple walking behind her smiled and said, "Isn't it great? We love walking this street to see so many beautiful gardens." "Never thought I'd see anything quite like this," Doreen said. She waved at the moss. "And talk about no maintenance." "Exactly," the husband said. "We've been talking about turning our front lawn into something similar. I presume some local business can get these kinds of mosses, and I can't imagine how many years it would take to have them grow into each other like this." "I think it took 2 or 3 years," the woman said. "We've been walking past it for at least 5, and I remember it used to be a green grassy lawn, but always involved all the irrigation and mowing. Then they took it all out, scraped it flat, came back with topsoil and planted all the mosses. It was a little sketchy at the beginning. Brown spots were showing up," she said with a smile. "But now it's just stunning." Doreen was amazed. "Do you think they'd mind if I took a picture of it?" "Not from here," she said with a laugh. "People come just to take pictures of these properties all the time." "I didn't even know this area existed," Doreen said, looking around. "If you're not a multimillionaire, you wouldn't be living here, so you'd have to find it another way." "I don't fit that rich category," Doreen said with a smile, "but I could certainly do something like this at home. If you have a lawn that's costing you water bills, and you need to do something that'll take back the maintenance, this is a great idea." They gave her animals each a quick pet and said a happy, "Have a good day," and walked away. Doreen pulled out her phone and took several photographs of the lawn, and then walked back to the woman in her echinacea garden and asked, "Would you mind if I took some photos of your beautiful garden?" The woman beamed. "Of course not. Have a go at it. I've been working on this garden for 20+ years. And it shows," Doreen said with joy. "Some of these plants have to be at least that old." "Lots of them are, yes," she said. Doreen smiled to see huge hollyhocks along the corner of the house against the neighbors. "I haven't seen hollyhocks in a long time. My grandmother planted those," she said. "They do ramble over time though." "I don't mind a little ramble," Doreen said. "It adds that natural touch to a garden, so it's not quite so cultivated looking." "I agree. Some people place their flagstones at perfect right angles to each other and cut their grass exactly 1 inch above," she said with a shake of her head. "Not me. I enjoy my garden. I don't want it to be something I have to be militant about." "Good point," Doreen said, and for the second time she waved goodbye and walked on.